Warning, the hidden engine funding Russia's drone war. The cargo plane idled on a Sahel strip as heat bled into night. Crates stenciled, agri-equipment split at the corners, a fine gold dust clinging to the tape. At 02:11, a Russian facilitator's phones went dark. 4 hours later, a drone strike erased the runway lights. One barcode on a seized bar wouldn't scan in any official registry. It resolved only in a private mirror to a refinery that didn't exist. The money moved first. Then the drones launched. Civilian grids, election nights, fragile economies, suddenly at stake. Someone flipped the switch. To understand that barcode and the switch, we need to go back. Here's the question. Who engineered the Gold for Drones pipeline? And can you stop it without shattering the economies it quietly props up? Because this isn't a smuggler's yarn with one villain. It's a procedure, a chain of quiet permissions, a playbook that survives the players. We'll trace it the way investigators did. The first anomaly, the machinery that kept it humming, the metadata nobody watched, the crisis points where it almost broke, the attempted shutdowns that punished the wrong people first, and the handful of pressure points that actually moved the needle. We end on the line of code that tied a bar of gold to a night of drones over a power plant. Start with what's known. Sanction networks learned to breathe underwater. Wagner's African footprint didn't vanish. It morphed into Africa Corps, same operators, new patch, deeper inside mines and checkpoints. Shadow logistics don't look like smugglers. They look like clerks with stamps. And the tempo of cheap, one-way attack drones surged as obvious supply lines got cut. The part almost everyone missed was the procedural layer. Refinery tags that mint legitimacy. Customs HS codes that decide whether a motor is a pump or a weapon. Payment rails that aren't swift but talk fine through friendly banks. And the metadata drift that looks like typos until the dots land on explosions. Gold is the pipeline's native language. Ore leaves in formal pits under militia watch, traded for diesel and promises, clinics, generators, roads. On satellite, night-only traffic swells. The weighbridge always breaks after sunset. Ore becomes money when a refinery stamp appears. No stamp, it's contraband. With a stamp, it's a commodity. So someone minted a ghost. A real refinery's ISO certification line was cloned into a private mirror registry that brokers relied on for speed. A shell company in a tax haven licensed that identity to a look-alike with one extra word in the name. On paper, the bars were born in a compliant plant. In reality, no furnace, no door, just a cache that green checked bad data. Once stamped, bullion could move through compliant hubs. Insurers nodded because the mirror said the code was current. The trick worked because a lazy checksum let near matches pass for perfect matches. That's how our seized bar's barcode lived in two worlds. Invalid in the official ISO lookup, green in the mirror. Now convert stamped metal to spending power without touching Western banks. The rail was messages, not wires. Russia's SPFS, a swift alternative, linked to third country fintech gateways. Regional systems netted obligations. Settlement imbalances got covered with gold pledges tallied by weight, not dollars. One agri-cooperative, with no fields, received 7-figure credits within 48 hours of a gold price spike. SPFS adjacent messages carrying equivalent value at a say. There's no MT1-3 to freeze, just reconciled ledgers and couriers who don't know what they moved. Drones don't cross borders as drones. They arrive as parts wearing the right names. Rushless motors ride under HS code 8413, pumps for liquids, bundled with irrigation kits. Optics pass as survey gear. Airframes sneak in as polymer casings. Customs screens for what it expects. Spreadsheets show clusters of 8413 shipments hopping ports right before audits, paperwork cycling neatly by quarter. A junior officer once flagged screws with the wrong thread pitch. A supervisor waved it through. Targets got hit months later. This is where metadata started talking. Investigators pry open the mirror registry after a barcode checksum drifts by one character. Inside are booking logs linking refinery stamped bars to procurement entities buying educational kits and weather platforms, code words for drone guts. Down drones carry recurring firmware signing keys. MAC address batches repeat across theaters, their OUIs rolling over the same week that certain pump consignments clear free zones. It's not one silver bullet. It's timing, stacked until denial looks silly. Meanwhile, the human layer makes the stakes unbearable. A miner's daughter leaves school to pan a river when liquidity dries up. A port clerk takes a buyout when audits tighten and men with rifles start leaning on forklifts. A junior analyst refuses to let an off-by-one-digit slide, chasing it through a weekend and buying a city one more night of power when an interdiction lands on Monday. So can you stop it without breaking what feeds people? You can chase hulls while they reflag and vanish. You can sanction loudly and watch shadow spreads fatten. Or you can break the math, crush the arbitrage that makes the route worth running, collapse the secrecy that grants legitimacy, and starve the integrator hubs that turn parts into weapons. It's tedious. It's mostly metadata and patience. But if the pipeline runs on loopholes and paperwork errors, the counter engine runs on the same, plus daylight. The outpost, cash, diesel, and a flag with no country. 3 days before that barcode misfired, the road ended in thorn and heat shimmer. No border post, just a rusted drum, a rope across the track, and a flag no ministry would claim. After sundown, a convoy rolled in blacked out, 2 fuel trucks breathing hot, a flatbed stacked with burlap, 3 pickups with men who didn't rush. Generators coughed awake. Agri-equipment meant diesel tonight. Here, stakes weren't theoretical. If this line held, or turned into bargaining power and cash reached markets by morning. If it snapped, the mine choked, pumps stopped, and 3 villages rationed sugar by spoon. Every liter of diesel was a promise and a threat. Keep the pit alive, and somewhere a procurement desk could hit reorder on parts that would become a swarm. The men in charge didn't bark. They counted. Contractors who used to wear Wagner patches and now wore Africa Corps logos moved with quiet authority. A foreman with a satellite phone and a comma-shaped scar-thumbed sax nodded at the weighbridge. The scale's red LED blinked, died, revived, died again, the ritual failure that always arrived after dark. The excuse was heat. The truth lived in notebooks, weights rounded down for the diggers, up for the buyers, value minted by pen. A local chief stepped from a white boo-boo that caught every beam. He waited for the second truck to hiss before he shook hands. The deal had rules: fuel for ore, access for protection, a clinic in 6 months, a generator soon. He kept the road safe enough that school could happen on Tuesdays and market on Fridays. Change the rate, and the flag over the drum might change by dawn. Meanwhile, something subtle traced across the sky. Night-only traffic deepened on a track that used to hold goats, tire cuts widening week by week. From orbit, a rectangle of scraped earth grew by meters, work lamps brightening past midnight when no inspector came. Prosperity from 400 miles up. On the ground, it sounded like a compressor whining through a cracked belt and men yelling over a pump that drank too fast. The weighbridge was the choke. A European badge on the frame, a maintenance sticker long expired, and a mechanic who always had a sensor on order. Each time the LED died, the handshake replaced the printout, and the sax rode off with numbers nobody outside that circle could contest. Taxes don't touch a handshake, neither do sanctions. Micro-stories made the math sting. A miner who pulled a rich pocket watched the chief's nephew steer the shiniest sack to the Russian pickup. He asked for an extra jerrycan. He got half. A boy rolled drums down the incline, eyes on his toes. The foreman's sat phone buzzed, twice, then again. He silenced it and lit a cigarette he shouldn't smoke. He wasn't worried about miners. He was worried about being late. Impact spread like a rumor that turned true. Within a month, better rifles leaned in the shade of roadside cafes. No shakedowns, just presence. A single-channel radio tower lit up on the ridge. The clinic opened 2 mornings a week with borrowed sutures, and a woman told her sister the Russians kept their word. A teacher got asked to run night classes in fundamentals for men who didn't bring notebooks. The militia wasn't announced. It settled in like a fence along the road. Parallel beats tied dirt to distant dark. While the pit chewed another meter, substations far away started taking hits closer together. Not catastrophic, just enough to keep repair crews sprinting and the grid off balance. The timelines overlapped in a way you only see when you plot them. Fuel off a truck or out of a hole, a promise under a dead LED. Weeks later, a midnight stutter in a city's power and 1,000 fridges warming in the dark. Everyone here knew ore wasn't money until a stamp said so. The chief had watched bracelets fail to buy medicine when the wrong form got the wrong stamp, or needed a birth certificate. Somewhere, a refinery name waited on a server, an ISO code cloned into a mirror registry a broker would trust more than his own eyes. No furnace, no door, just a green check in a private cache that let bars exist in 2 places at once. The Africa Corps men didn't need to understand the mirror, they needed to keep the pumps turning. Their paycheck rode on throughput. The chief's influence rode on quiet roads. The miners' children went to class when diesel flowed and went to the river when it didn't. Every player had a reason to nod at the weighbridge and wave the convoy through. A satellite blinked, a notebook closed, a rope lifted, and the pipeline took its first breath. Cash swapped for sacks, sacks for stamps, stamps for credits that would never show up on a dollar wire. The foreman finally answered his buzzing phone, listened, and said only Friday. He pocketed the handset, checked the sky the way desert men do, then waved the flatbed forward. The boys rolled another drum. The LED stayed dark. And somewhere far from Thorn and Salt, a parts list updated under HS code 8413, right on time. The Ghost Refinery, a name without a door. To turn sacks into spendable power, you needed a stamp, not a wax seal, an industrial identity that banks, brokers, and insurers would treat as gospel. Address, license, ISO certification. The trick was none of it had to exist beyond paper. It only had to exist in the places compliance officers check when they're busy. The first clue came from a site visit that didn't make sense. An auditor followed invoices to an industrial park and found scrub and goat tracks behind a corrugated fence. A sun-faded sign promised future employment zone. On paper, the refinery had a phone number, a company logo, and an ISO certification formatted exactly how screens like to see it. On the ground, no foundations, no stack, no door, just wind and dust. The documentation looked clean because it borrowed its cleanliness. A defunct, legitimate refinery's ISO certification line had been cloned into a private mirror registry. An accelerator brokers relied on so they didn't have to wait for the official database. Somewhere, years back, an admin scraped the registry for speed and left an exceptions file loose. Into that gap stepped a tax haven shell that licensed the cloned identity to a near twin with one extra word in the name, and a logo that felt like a photocopy 2 shades lighter. The mirror made the lie comfortable. The official ISO lookup would have flagged a closure notice dated 3 years earlier. The mirror, updated on a lazy weekly cache, green checked a near match because someone had widened checksum tolerance to reduce false negatives. A 1-digit drift that should have failed still slid through. That's how one bar's barcode lived in 2 worlds at once. Invalid in the official register, valid in the mirror under Refining Solutions East. Once stamped, bullion behaved like any other commodity. It moved to compliance-friendly hubs, flew insured, landed in vaults. A checker scanned a barcode, saw a current ISO line, and logged received. Insurers bound cover because their internal portals pulled from the same mirror, and nobody wanted to slow standard shipments in a busy quarter. Risk on paper looked ordinary. Origin, thanks to the cloned line, looked settled. Meanwhile, the Ghost learned a rhythm. Validations always hit Fridays at 23:55 local, 5 minutes before the mirror's weekly cache rolled. That meant anyone cross-checking on Monday saw fresh green and moved on. It wasn't just a stamp, it was a metronome. A junior compliance analyst finally drew the timing on a whiteboard and watched the pattern stare back. She dug into headers and found every Friday burst resolved from an IP range registered to a logistics firm that shared directors with a broker known for heavy unallocated gold flows. Unallocated meant the desk booked exposure, not bars, no forklifts, no seals, plenty of deniability. The Ghost Refinery's stamp let those desks pretend they were nowhere near a conflict when they were bathing in it. An inspection team tried to put hands on metal. Locals in reflective vests gave a tour of forklifts that smelled too clean and an office lined with framed certificates printed on thick paper with no raised seals. The plant manager apologized for a maintenance shutdown, produced a logbook with entries in 2 inks, and offered tea. In a corner, cathode plates stacked by a door looked like they'd been arranged for a photograph. A control panel hummed, but the breakers sat in the off position. The mirror told on itself again. Booking logs meant for ops, never for outsiders. Linked refinery stamped bars to beneficiaries with names you've already heard whispered. Educational kits, research optics, weather platforms. The euphemisms matched invoices that later moved brushless motors as HS8413, pumps for liquids, optics as survey gear, and airframes as polymer casings. Fridays fed Mondays. Mondays fed manifests. Weeks later, a grid coughed in blue light. Insurers didn't see that ledger. They saw loss ratios and a corridor that had behaved for years. Brokers didn't see a goat track. They saw spreads that tightened at quarter end when the mirror's cash kept desks from asking extra questions. The ghost depended on that laziness like lungs depend on air. Then came the human twist that made it all fragile. The contractor who built the mirror cache died years earlier. His scripts kept running on a server auto renewed to a forgotten corporate card. The exceptions list, the place East lived, never got audited. A dead man's code kept validating a phantom refinery that moved real money and bought real parts that landed in real wreckage. Investigators pushed on a checksum, and the whole quiet cathedral rang. The mirror's green checks lined up with SBFS adjacent payment notes carrying equivalent value at a say. Those notes mapped to procurement shells that never touched dirt. Down drones coughed the same firmware signing keys quarter after quarter. MAC address batches appeared in swarms the same week. Pump consignments cleared free zones. It wasn't courtroom proof. It was choreography. A micro story sealed it. The analyst who sketched the timing caught a certificate refresh at 23:57 Friday. She stayed, ordered cold noodles, and flagged 3 shipments booked against that validation. On Monday, a port added secondary inspection to those exact consignments. Foam cut, motors surfaced. A week later, a city that should have gone dark at midnight didn't. The ghost refinery was a name without a door, an ISO line without a furnace, a green check that taught a pipeline to breathe on Fridays. Close the mirror, narrow the checksum, and the barcodes stop living in 2 worlds. You don't need to kick in a gate to break a spell made of paperwork. You only need to make the lie slow down long enough for daylight to catch it. The commodity desk that does hold metal. Stamped bars mean nothing until someone turns them into numbers that clear. That's what the desk did. 15 floors up, glass walls, 2 clocks set to London and Dubai, and muted TV looping tickers. No vault on site, no forklifts booked. Their edge lived in unallocated gold, positions, not pallets, hedged, rolled, unwound, and booked as tidy profits that didn't smell like mines or mirrors. The stakes ran through inboxes. If they took the flow tied to that ghost refinery line, the pipeline hummed. If they balked, procurement fronts would wait on credits and hubs would miss build windows. Traders told themselves the risk was reputational, not lethal. Fines, clawbacks, career dents. They never said grid or drone at the desk. They said spread and counterparty. The first hook was price. A junior analyst, precise, sleep-deprived, flagged a 60-80 cent anomaly on overnight unallocated swaps that tightened like clockwork ahead of the mirror's Friday cash and snapped back by Monday close. He overlaid it with vault receipts inside their internal tool, the ones that simply marked exposure to pooled metal, and with broker prints showing a rush of origin tags tied to that East suffix. The chart looked like free money fenced by compliance language. He sent it up with the subject line ref flow timing oddities. His manager skimmed for words that start fights, sanctions, Wagner, Africa, and saw none. He saw ISO valid, our counterparty, insurance bound. He wrote back, tradable. The kid added a second chart. When they bought the spread in that window, the reversion financed itself by Monday. It looked mechanical. It looked like a permission slip. Phones warmed. Brokers pitched distressed African flow, no country, just refinery outages and temporary bottlenecks. The desk didn't ask for foundations or smokestacks. They asked if the origin met good delivery if needed. The broker said, unallocated, delivery not anticipated. Everyone relaxed. Paper, not pallets. Positions, not bars. They put on size in slices. Long, unallocated exposure against forwards that offset the book through Asia, where a metals house with a taste for shadows took the other side. The desk hit the narrowest windows, Fridays just before the mirror cached, Mondays as green checks refreshed. P&L blossomed in steady increments. Quarter to date, the strategy became flow. Flow became identity. Identity became bonus math. Meanwhile, tells crept into the hedging. An Asian broker widened spreads precisely when HS 8413 consignments, pumps on paper, spiked through a free zone. A mid-tier bank's metals desk pulsed in night sessions right after SPFS-linked credits landed for an agri-cooperative with no fields. Nobody said collusion. They said market color. The kid still couldn't shake the overlay in his head. He mapped MAC address OUIs from down drones against their Friday tickets. Twice in 6 weeks, clusters of identical OUIs showed up in wreckage within days of the desk's best Fridays. He printed the scatter and walked it into his manager's office. Quarter end was 12 days away. The manager didn't look up. Correlation isn't causation, he said, softer now. If compliance clears it, it's cleared. He forwarded the memo to legal with routine check. Legal replied with a paragraph about ISO validation protocols and reliance on industry standard registries. The mirror counted as industry standard. Box ticked. They sized up again. The desk's owners liked the curve, small drawdowns, tidy mean reversion, compelling narrative for investors who wanted market neutrality, while the world caught fire. Internally, they tagged the trades as ARB East, a label that said nothing and everything at once. Here S where the human hits. On a Wednesday, the kid tightened a model flag so anything touching the East origin needed a second sign-off. The manager overrode it as seasonal. The kid walked home past lit windows and watched a video of a transformer explode, blue-white, a city guttering for air. He thought about calling a regulator, then read his contract again and poured cold coffee down a drain. Meanwhile, counterparties gained the rail. When the desk unwound for a gain, the broker owed a shell, the shell owed a coup, and the messages hopped through SPFS-adjacent fields that carried equivalent value at a say. The settlement record didn't show dollars. It showed grams. It showed a promise backed by bars the desk never had to smell. A micro story landed on a bland Friday. The kid's model pinged a perfect window at 23:54, 1 minute before the mirror's cache. He hesitated, then clicked hold. 30 seconds later, his manager leaned over and hit execute. Monday, P&L smiled. Tuesday, a crate of pumps cleared a free zone on a lane their risk engine never flagged. 2 weeks later, a substation he'd circled on a spreadsheet coughed twice and went dead. The impact rippled in spreadsheets and in rooms with humming jigs. The desk booked profits that turned into credits that hit integrator shells inside 48 hours. The hub stopped pleading and started scheduling. Motors, optics, airframes lined up on benches, and a signing utility chirped green as firmware rolled. The distance between a Friday ticket and a Monday build collapsed into habit. Owners had even gained downside. If a sanction ever tagged the ghost suffix or a linked shell, they'd novate exposure to a clean affiliate one jurisdiction over and book losses as exceptional. The strategy was a ladder of exits built before the building caught fire. The kid wasn't in the exit. He was in the stairwell. And there it was, the hairline crack. The anomaly depended on a lazy checksum in a dead man's mirror, on SPFS field cousins that slid past filters, on quarter-and rhythms nobody wanted to interrupt. It depended on no one lining up firmware keys, Mac batches, HS 8413 hops, and desk tickets on one ugly chart. The kid had come close. He hadn't broken it, not yet. But every Friday, as the clock crawled toward 23:55, he felt the metronome tap against his ribs and wondered which line on his screen would light a runway or darken a city. The rail, swift alternatives, and gold-backed settlements. Cash leaves fingerprints, messages don't. The brief to every facilitator was simple: move value fast, never touch swift, and leave nothing a prosecutor can freeze. That pointed them to a lattice of local clearing systems, regional nets, and a Russian backbone most bankers outside certain circles pretend not to see: SBFS, Moscow's swift alternative. Same fields, different flags, fewer alarms. Stakes cut straight through paydays and power. If the rail worked, miners saw cash on market day, clinics bought diesel, and integrator hubs hit their Monday intake with parts that turned into sorties by Wednesday. If it hiccuped, salaries slipped, credit sharks circled, and the signing utility at the hub chirped into an empty room. Speed mattered. Predictable windows mattered more. Action began with netting. Two mid-sized banks in neighboring countries kept domestic correspondent links alive through local RTGS rails. Invoices read like agriculture, irrigation assemblies, survey kits, educational platforms. The key line lived in the remittance note, an internal reference that didn't say dollars. It said weight, grams at 999.5 fineness, equivalent value at a say. You don't wire a promise like that, you mirror it. Here's how they stitched the hop. When the commodity desk unwound a profitable unallocated position, it owed a broker who owed a shell that called itself an agricultural cooperative. Rather than push an MT103, the broker's bank hit a partner API that mirrored SBFS message fields, payer, beneficiary, reference, and a pledge statement in free text. Settle against X kilograms O, fineness Y, allocated at ZZ, was the ghost refinery's stamp the mirror adore. The API translated out to SBFS on one side, back into local rails on the other. No dollar correspondent, no Western screen to choke. Imbalances got squared with gold-backed settlements. Once a week, sometimes twice, couriers moved doré or minted bars through free zones under ordinary cover. Not every pledge became metal in motion. Enough did to keep confidence taut. The rest lived as rolling credits tallied by net weight across ledgers nobody audited hard. If a pledge slipped below threshold, margin terms bit, top up grams, or accept a haircut on the next agri-equipment invoice. Detail hid in weekend clocks. The cooperative, with no fields, consistently received 7-figure credits within 48 hours of Friday mirror validations. Late Sunday local time, reconciliation batches ran across the API bridge. Monday, a supplier in a third country shipped pumps under HS 8413 on 30-day terms, cushioned by a bank guarantee that cited an internal risk rating, backed by commodity collateral. The collateral was a promise in grams, not a bar in a vault. The bridge itself wasn't a backdoor. It was a partner door labeled integration. Fintech logs, when investigators finally pried them open, showed endpoint calls formatted to SBFS spec, optional fields included. IP trails bounced through content delivery networks, and a whitelist that, inconveniently, included a logistics firm sharing directors with the ghost refinery's shell. The system passed audits because the words on the slide said domestic clearing. The data said translated fields. Reconciliation wasn't a spreadsheet someone emailed at close. It was code. A private ledger module compared pledge references to refinery booking IDs lifted from the mirror cache, assigner accounts, and assay entries that borrowed their cleanliness from cloned ISO lines. If a shipment lagged, a basic smart contract shaved basis points off the next credit line and posted a nudge to the cooperative. No appeals, just arithmetic. Impact landed where timelines meet. Procurement fronts stopped begging. They planned. Motors under 8413 moved on a schedule keyed to pledge windows. Optics in survey kits followed. Integrator hubs set assembly rhythms to late Sunday reconciliations and Monday intake spikes. Strike tempo tightened. Where there had been gaps, there were now runs, 2-3 nights without a breath. Meanwhile, normal life bent to the same metronome. Liquidity reached trading towns like a tide. Market days swelled. Then prices crept up as militants taxed the road and shadow lenders skimmed an interest for risk. The same rail that paid a clinic's diesel refilled a parts bin labeled weather platform. The contradiction fit on a receipt. Micro stories brought the abstraction home. A mid-level operator at the fintech, Samia, noticed end-of-week spikes. Different shells, same memo. AE kit. He drafted a suspicious activity report. His boss told him the partner bank rated the client's low risk. Log it. Month end. 2 days later, a warehouse 3 countries away paid cash for terrain mappers. And a week after that, a substation camera caught a swarm that flew like it had read the invoice. Pressure brushed in from capitals. Guidance notes warned banks to treat SBFS-linked messages with care, to watch for gold pledge euphemisms, equivalent value at a say, weight-based netting. Some tightened. Others offloaded volume to affiliates one hop removed from polite scrutiny. The flow flexed. Phrasing changed. The weight stayed. Investigators learned the windows. Friday, 23:55 validations. Late Sunday reconciliations. Monday guarantees. They set tripwires under those ticks. Human review for pledge language. Secondary inspection for 8413 consignments booked by forwarders tied to last quarter's flows. Real-time pings when educational platform orders matched pledge references. It didn't break the rail, it bent it. The rail's power was always the same. Value without visibility, promises enforced by grams instead of quarts, timing tight enough that parts met jigs before anyone finished a memo. As long as messages moved faster than outrage, the engine breathed. The trick now was to make metadata move faster than both. The disguise, HS codes, false bottoms, and agri equipment. You couldn't ship a drone through a port without someone noticing, so they shipped a farm, on paper anyway. Stakes lived in small choices at tired desks. If a motor cleared as a pump, the cheapest weapon in the war stayed cheap. If it got flagged, a swarm never formed, and a town slept through a night it wasn't supposed to have. For a customs officer on hour 9, every crate was a wager between a salary and a suspension. Action looked boring until it was. A warehouse crew slipped brushless motors into foam cradles, hid them inside molded housings, then added impellers and gaskets that could plausibly live in water. A label slid onto the carton, HS code 8413, pumps for liquids, and the box nestled among irrigation kits and polyethylene tubing. The invoice read, rural water management components. The consignee, an agronomy department that did exist, it just never ordered pallets that heavy. Optics took a cleaner mask. Thermal cores rode as survey kits, complete with tripods, orange vests, and calibration charts flattened into the top layer. Airframes stripped to shells moved as polymer casings for educational weather platforms. The euphemisms weren't clever. They were tested. Every term had once survived a compliance officer's question and turned into a template. Detail hid in the rhythm of codes. Clusters of HS 8413 consignments hopped ports right before audits, ducking into free zones with generous transshipment rules. A crate logged in Mombasa on Thursday reappeared in Jebel Ali on Sunday night, sliding under fresh manifest that recycled the same SKUs with a minor typo. Nozzle becomes nozzle. Paperwork cycled by quarter because auditors check quarters. The flow learned calendars better than the men chasing it. Free zones did their job, speed trade. Pallets bounced between bonded warehouses where origin launders by movement. A shipment entered as CN and left as I after a value-added line. Packaging optimization shaved away the chance of scrutiny. End users looked safe on screens. Universities, municipal water boards, and agri-coops that rented third floors above currency exchanges. A micro story landed at dusk in a coastal shed. A junior officer popped a crate corner and found a bag of screws that didn't match the irrigation catalog. Heads wrong, thread pitch off. He checked HS 8413, called a supervisor. The supervisor skimmed the manifest, saw the insurance certificate, tapped the crate with his pen. "Don't make enemies with paperwork that clears," he signed. The screws went back in. 3 months later, trench footage caught a quad rotor with the same head pattern flashing in a prop guard. Patterns grew teeth when metadata joined the room. The same week, pump clusters surged through 2 free zones. Down drones coughed MAC address batches from vendors that never sold pumps. Organizational identifiers repeated across theaters, rolling over in lockstep with 8413 spikes. Investigators overlaid carrier scans, container numbers on free zones CCTV, and firmware signing keys that wouldn't stop recurring. The line between irrigation parts and a Wednesday night strike got harder to ignore. Insurance made the disguise safer. Policies that said farm equipment turned future disputes into transit damage, not proliferation. Underwriters leaned on documents and the absence of red flags. The red flags lived in metadata most carriers never pulled. Time zone stamps misaligned with consignee hours, barcode checksums that drifted like the ghost refinery. IP trails on portals pinged from logistics firms tied to our mirror registries actors. When one carrier paused cover on a corridor, the flow moved to another with a higher premium. Margins absorbed it. Farmers on paper never complained. Meanwhile, schedule math kept the trick humming. The SBFS adjacent rail pushed credits within 48 hours of Friday gold validations. Shippers timed loadouts to match. Fridays carried the heaviest pump bookings. Sundays saw the most manifest edits because Monday audits liked clean ledgers. When a port tightened inspections, the flow went scenic. Dar es Salaam to Muscat, Muscat to a free zone to a Black Sea feeder whose AIS flickered at just the wrong times for just the right reasons. There were tells if you knew where to look. 8413 consignments with gross weights 10% over spec. Polymer shells and survey kits routing to the same forwarder in the same week. Return addresses resolving to shared mailrooms. A recurring consignee note, hold for lab calibration, on shipments containing nothing you calibrate. Even the screws whispered when the threads didn't match a catalog. So the first fix didn't kick down doors, it edited a risk engine. Any 8413 load above a weight threshold with accessory SKUs on a quiet list got secondary inspection, especially if routed after Sunday reconciliations. Foam got drilled, false bottoms gave way to motors. The hit rate jumped, so did the workarounds. HS 8413 shifted to cousins, hydraulic components, mechanical seals. Survey kits became terrain mappers. The words changed. The cargo didn't. Micro wins paid out as nights. A bonded warehouse flagged 3 pump pallets for a side bay drill because their weights crept above spec, and the forwarder's history matched the mirror's Friday cadence. Motors surfaced. That week's signing window opened with fewer kits than orders. A substation everyone expected to lose slept under ordinary sodium light. But the disguise learned too. A forwarder split complete sets, shells 1 week, pumps 2 later, optics the week after, to blur synchronicity. The fix adapted. Ports started scoring clusters across rolling windows, not single days, and tied those scores to firmware signer alerts. When a shell vendor, without a real lab, renewed certs on the first Monday of the quarter, the same Monday integrators loved. 8,413 cousins got nudged to secondary. No drama, just a drill. Here's the quiet truth the disguise kept proving. Customs engines screen for the cargo they expect, not the behavior that matters. The pipeline wore farms because farms are decent. It wore universities because education is safe. It wore calibration notes because science sounds patient. Breaking the mask meant teaching the system to care less about nouns and more about timing, weights, and who always shows up 2 days after a clean gold truck scans post 2 at noon. The leak, 1 barcode, 2 worlds. The barcode should have been mute, a scuff on a bar that had already changed hands twice. But when the analyst punched it into the official ISO registry, the screen flashed, invalid. She tried the private mirror brokers loved because it loaded fast. Green check. Same base number, 1 extra suffix, checks them off by a single digit. 2 worlds, 1 bar. Stakes spiked fast. If this mismatch linked ghost stamps to procurement fronts, sanctions wouldn't just name a shell. They'd ripple through banks, brokers, insurers, and free zones that had treated a cash like scripture. Miss the link, and the pipeline would grow more confident, convinced due diligence meant checking the mirror and moving on. Real families sat under that fork. Miners needing cash, port crews needing wages, cities needing lights that didn't blink out at midnight. Action started with an audit email that turned into a midnight call. The registry admin, sleep-heavy, admitted the performance cache was a contractor's clone layered on top of the real ISO database so trading desks didn't stall. The contractor had died years earlier. His script still scraped weakly. He'd shipped a patch to reduce false negatives that let near matches slide as perfect. Refining solutions east, the extra word lived in his exceptions file. Nobody ever pruned it. They pulled logs. Friday, 23, 55 local every week. Bursts of validations for east, all within 6 minutes, all from an IP block registered to a logistics firm that shared directors with a gold broker heavy on unallocated flow. The official ISO registry held no east. The mirror did, because a dead man's tolerance allowed it. A single off-by-one checksum, the kind meant to kill fakes, got softened into a courtesy that minted legitimacy. A checksum drift led to a ledger nobody was meant to see. Brokers called it an ops tool. Investigators called it a roadmap. It listed refinery bookings, shipment references, and beneficiary tags buried in notes, fields of unallocated allocations. Cross-reference those with SPFS-adjacent messages carrying equivalent value at a say, and threads lit up. Agri-cooperatives, educational labs, weather platforms, the shells downstream received credits within 48 hours of those Friday validations. Fridays fed Sundays, Sundays fed Mondays, Mondays fed crates that said pumps and moved like weapons. Hardware confirmed what spreadsheets whispered. Down drones kept coughing the same firmware signing keys, cert chains that renewed on the first Monday of each quarter, even when holidays would have closed an honest office. MAC address OUIs, the identifiers baked into network cards, arrived in clusters that matched integrator batches. Overlay those clusters with mirror validations, and HS8413 spikes through specific free zones, and the pattern stopped being polite. The same week an East batch cleared green, a bonded warehouse logged educational kits. A pump pallet scanned an entry gate, and a van with Weather Lab on the side rolled into an integrator lot. Nights later, the new OUI range buzzed a frontline scanner. There was a human clock inside the code. The mirror's cache rolled once a week, so East always validated 5 minutes before rollover. Monday crosschecks always saw fresh. A junior underwriter at an insurer noticed the mirror's green didn't match the official ISO query tool. Her boss told her to trust the internal portal. The internal portal pulled from the mirror, policy bound, corridor covered. A crate of pumps slept under sodium lights. Investigators followed a weirder scene. The contractor's server, auto-renewing on a corporate card nobody cancelled, sat in a rack that also hosted a gaming company's chat. Encrypted facilitator messages rode weekend spikes of players talking about raids. Snippets recovered from a memory freeze read like heist poetry. Drop 12.5 at RSC 9995. RSC was the ghost's initials. The code had a nickname. A whiteboard in a cramped room grew dense. 2 columns, official and mirror, a river of timestamps between. Every Friday, 23, 55 check got 3 arrows. To a pledge message in SPFS fields, to an 8413 consignment routed through a known free zone, and to a firmware cert renewal or signing window at an integrator hub. When lines crossed too often, they stopped saying coincidence. They started running drills. The first live test was quiet. They sat on the mirror Friday night. At 23:57, East flickered green. 41 hours later, an SPFS-adjacent credit hit an agri-coup. 12 more hours, a container labeled 8413 scanned into a bonded warehouse. This time, a risk rule, buried in a memo few had read, nudged it to secondary. Foam peeled, motors surfaced, no press release. Just a pallet that didn't make a van, and a signing utility at the hub, chirping to a room with fewer kits than orders. Micro stories framed the edges. A broker insisted Friday closures were operational, then booked a quarter vacation, leaving a deputy to click, confirm, on flows tied to East. A free zone guard noticed the same driver badge scan at 2 gates in 1 minute. The system shrugged. He wrote it in a pocket notebook. An insurer's junior analyst tried to escalate the East mismatch. The case closed when the internal portal screenshot showed green. Impact showed up where it hurts and heals. Strike tempo stuttered for a week. The integrator hub missed a window, cancelled a night shift, then shifted builds to match a new inland route they thought nobody watched. Ports saw the Cadence and extended Sunday staffing by 2 hours. Insurers added a surcharge to any policy bound on corridors whose ISO validations didn't line up with the official registry's checksum rules. Brokers scrambled to rename East and nudge validations to a new minute. The metronome moved, it didn't vanish. What nobody forgot was how small the trigger was. A single bar's barcode, a scratch that refused to resolve, gave up a dead man's cash, a lazy checksum, and a rhythm that tied grams to strikes. The analyst who wouldn't let it go printed the drift and taped it above her monitor. "Don't chase boxes," she wrote beneath it. "Chase behavior." Weeks later, a Monday that had been circled stayed ordinary. In this war, ordinary was a win. The first cut: insurance, audits, and the vanishing fleet. Once the mirror bled its secret, the first scalpel didn't go after men. It went after confidence. Interdict one pallet, and you win a night. Pull insurance and audit the stamp that made gold believable, and you starve a corridor without firing a shot. The pitch landed in a glass room with a view of cranes. An insurer's risk committee stared at a slide. Refining Solutions East, absent in official ISO, present in internal cash. The junior underwriter who'd asked the awkward question watched senior faces choose between yield and doubt. The head of risk proposed a limited pause. Suspend cover on routes tied to East validations and on HS 8413 clusters with gross weights over spec, especially those that clear after Sunday reconciliations. The vote came down cautious. 2 corridors paused. Vessels that touched both within 30 days lost cover by default. At dawn, audit letters left printers. 2 refineries in neighboring countries were told to expect enhanced due diligence, on-site inspections, assay rechecks, and cradle-to-gate chain of custody logs for doré lots that always cleared on Fridays. Auditors didn't use the word ghost. They wrote registry discrepancies. One plant staged a maintenance shutdown. The other bolted a shiny badge over a corroded tank and called it an upgrade. Sea lanes flexed like muscle. A feeder hauling pumps left a free zone with AIS blinking clean, then went technical an hour later and reappeared with a different flag and a voyage plan that hugged a coastline it had never hugged. Bills of lading got rewritten mid-sea. Consignee names shed a letter. A familiar hull showed up with a fresh paint job and papers from a registry that sold flags by email on weekends. 3 weeks looked like progress. Throughput dipped, premiums jumped. A port's night shift drilled foam and surfaced motors. 2 educational weather platform consignments went to secondary and didn't come out. The desk's Friday rotations shrank as brokers balked at higher haircuts. Strike tempo softened, not from a podium, just from math. People moved, as they always do when rules change. A port clerk received a one-time offer, half a year's salary to take leave during audits. He took it and boarded a bus out of town. A whistleblower at a broker realized her initials sat under a set of East tickets. She walked into a police station, then spent the night in a safe apartment in a city she'd never seen. Word traveled on quiet channels. Burners lit. Calendars went blank. The fleet adapted in hours. Ships reflagged. Crews rotated. Ownership papers faxed from shell to shell with stamps that looked older than the captain signing them. A broker's email signature changed jurisdictions mid-thread. Freight forwarders slid top clients into premium reroutes through ports with sleepy scanners and fewer Sunday staff. The shadow fleet logic honed on oil crossed over to crates. Add distance, add fog, keep moving. In audit rooms, small things broke big patterns. An ISO sticker peeled back to reveal an older logo. An Assay Labs reference sample pinged a purity curve that nature doesn't draw. A visitor log listed a consultant who shared a last name with a minister. Auditors took photos, noted serials, asked for copies, and watched a manager's smile twitch at the edge. Collateral arrived first to people who never saw a broker's invoice. Legitimate exporters, cement, seed, even honest pumps, found cover suspended or delayed. A shipment of medical refrigerators sat in bonded limbo while attorneys argued corridor exposure and mirror audits. A real cooperative with real fields begged for an exemption and got told to use alternate providers. Prices rose in markets that didn't know what SBFS was, only that diesel cost more at sunset. On the other side, procurement fronts absorbed shock and found the seams. When one insurer froze a corridor, grey-letter carriers stepped in with documents that looked like policies and weren't. A friendly registry expanded capacity over a weekend and emailed a flood of flags. A freight platform tweaked its UI so HS8413 auto-suggested hydraulic components, nudging filings one column to the right. The parts kept traveling. The premiums got paid. Margins tightened and held. Hubs felt the drag. A Wednesday intake missed its mark. A signing jig chirped to a room with fewer kits than orders. A night shift cancelled without notice. A supervisor told crews to check back Monday. Then the rhythm recovered down an inland route we'd seen faint on a wall map. The sign on a sister warehouse flipped from Meteo Labs storage to EduTech components, stencils ready before the doors opened. Micro stories told you where the blade cut and where it slid. A warehouse supervisor who'd signed 6 weather platform releases stared at a camera aimed at the wall, not the dock. He filed an internal report. 2 days later, he got promoted to inventory modernization, an empty room and a laptop glued to a login screen. A tea cellar across from the hub added new van plates to her notebook and underlined a midweek hour that kept mattering. Regulators tried harmonizing the quiet way. Guidance memos nudged banks to human review SBFS pledge language, told insurers to align ISO checks to the official registry, and asked customs to flag HS8413 clusters that travel with polymer shells in survey kits. Some jurisdictions moved together. Others moved in press quotes. Delay became a corridor. The window was 14 days wide. Enough. By the quarter's close, the first cut had taught everyone a lesson. You can squeeze cover, stack audits, and slow a week. The fleet will vanish and reappear with new paint. Or you can keep trimming trust at the joints, mirrors, codes, corridors, until the machine spends more on motion than it earns on spread. The pause in the night wasn't luck. It was paperwork bleeding out just fast enough for daylight to catch it. Breaking the math, arbitrage traps and price floors. While ships learned to vanish, a quieter plan formed on a whiteboard. Don't chase hulls, wreck the incentive curve. The pipeline lived on predictable spreads and cheap cover. You don't blockade that. You make its favorite trade a losing habit. The stakes weren't theory. Push the wrong lever and you crush miners who have never seen a compliance portal. Leave the spreads intact and procurement hits reorder on parts that keep a grid gasping. The question turns surgical. Where do you bend price without breaking people? Action opened with auctions that wore dull names. Market stabilization sales. Time to collide with the mirrors Friday 23. 55 validations. Dumped bars with assay quirks that match the Ghost refinery's profile. Weight regularities. Fineness around 999.5. Not huge volumes, just enough to nudge screens. Each time east flickered green. Supply appeared a tick below the shadow book's break-even. Honest hedgers stepped in. Shadow books leaned the wrong way. Synthetic shorts did the rest. In 2 time zones, coordinated positions leaned against the exact forward tenors the desk favored for Friday to Monday rotations. Volatility landed on roll dates when thinly capitalized fronts had to post margin or get cut. Client-driven flows, someone would say on Monday, glossing a forced unwind. Phones rang across 3 jurisdictions. Some accounts topped up grams on paper. Others couldn't and ate liquidations that rippled into brokers who dressed procurement shells as agri-coups. Detail hid in basis. A quiet wedge opened between unallocated and allocated quotes only during the Friday window. Pricing engines, those sleepy pipes between screens and risk, widened that wedge by a dozen basis points for counterparties tagged to certain patterns. SBFS adjacent credits with equivalent value at a say. HS8413 heavy bookings after Sunday reconciliations, mirror lookups without audit trails. Publicly, it read like liquidity backstop. Internally, it read like make their rhythm expensive. Compliance never wrote trap. They wrote market integrity calibration, targeting abnormal timing clusters. Lawyers blessed the language. Traders watched a favorite window grow teeth. Impact hit fast, then quiet. One commodity desk with a taste for ARB East found its quarter upside down in 4 trading days. The book manager called it temporary divergence on the earnings call and cut 2 juniors. Across an ocean, an Asian broker, often the other side of those Friday longs, got squeezed when synthetic shorts jammed his hedge. He unwound ugly, sent a bland client note about rebalancing, and raised spreads for any flow with Agri in the memo. Procurement felt it next. A mid-tier bank that had extended soft credit to a cooperative trimmed advance rates and demanded faster documentation. SBFS credits still arrived, but cushions thinned. Integrator hubs spaced builds. QA slipped. An airframe jig went idle for a day because an accountant said, "Wait for Monday." Then the side effects arrive, like they always do. Artisanal miners sell into spreads they don't control. When the basis widened on Fridays and auctions dumped lookalikes, local buyers shaded bids to cover volatility. Panners brought home less. A market thinned by sundown. Credit wore sharper smiles. A chief promised to renegotiate. He couldn't renegotiate with a basis filter. So the plan adapted. To spare communities while pressing the pipeline, prepay tents went up at vetted pits. Clean corridor buy programs that posted fair prices in local currency and stamped Doré to public ledger with GPS, time and fineness. Those buys ran on a revolving float, funded by partners who preferred clinics lit to grids dark. The spread shadow buyers used to skim got smaller because miners could point at a barcode on a phone and say, "Pay me that." Back on screens, the trap widened through metadata. Firmware signing keys that kept reappearing across wreckage correlated with accounts that leaned into the Friday mirror window. Risk engines began assigning those keys a premium, extra margin, shorter settlement, filed under operational correlation. Procurement budgets hate premiums. Hubs trimmed orders another notch. Strike runs slipped from 3 nights to 2. Micro Stories told you it worked. A warehouse manager stopped seeing rush stickers every Monday. An integrator HR rep posted a temporary furloughs notice. A port inspector made his daughter's school play on a Sunday because overtime shifted earlier and drills caught more foam. Somewhere else, a miner's wife stopped buying meat on Fridays. Buyers had started shaving prices at noon. The pipeline tried to route around math. It pushed aggregate, crushed or labeled stone, toward toll refiners, blurring origin behind moisture games and bulk sacks. The clock reset. Assays chased ships. The Friday metronome mattered less. But the lessons stuck. Targeted liquidity, timed volatility, and quiet basis filters can make a clean-looking spread unplayable without a single headline. Governors grumbled. One called a press conference to denounce foreign interference in commodity pricing. He shook hands with a broker who'd just eaten a margin call and promised support for miners that arrived as a loan managed by a cousin. The cousin didn't answer his phone. Meanwhile, the counter kept its edge by staying boring. No theatrics, just auctions that land when mirrors tick, filters that nudge when SBFS memos say equivalent value, and prepay tents that turn barcodes into bargaining power at the gate. Brokers will adapt. Codes will slide to cousins. But the curve they counted on stops behaving like a gift and starts behaving like a hill. Here's the part that doesn't make a headline and still matters. A mid-level regulator's memo, quietly harmonizing basis filters with ISO mirror audits and HS 8413 anomaly flags, can stall 1,000 drones. Not forever. Long enough for one more night with the lights on. The switch from bullion to stone. Pressure bent the pipeline so it shapeshifted. Bars disappeared. Rocks appeared. Stakes snapped to traceability. Bars wear serials, stamps, and barcodes that argue back. Doré can still be tagged, but crushed ore concentrates labeled stone slides through weighbridges like gravel. If you can't see the money, you can't freeze it. If you can't freeze it, procurement doesn't pause. Families at the gate still need cash. Hubs still need torque, optics, and a signing chirp on Monday. One disguise promised to feed both. Action started at the yards where ore first met machines. Trucks that once hauled sacks to ghost refineries now queued at aggregate processing sites under new signs. Same men, same guards, different clipboards. All got pulverized, moisture sprayed into lift weight without raising eyebrows, then bagged in bulk sacks stamped construction aggregate. Bills of lading picked humble HS codes a degree off anything that shouts metal. Cement plants by the trainload. Inspectors don't count pebbles. Shipments flipped direction. Instead of minting bars near the pit, the flow shipped concentrates to third country toll refiners tucked inside real industrial parks, small smelters with night shifts and labs whose seals were current. Doré returned to market stamped ex-refiner far from Africa, changing the origin conversation in rooms that only argue what's on paper. A vault clerk could point to a fresh local stamp and say, compliant feedstock. Upstream disappeared behind moisture and forklifts. Details did the laundering. Assay labs logged samples as construction finds, then filed metallurgical reports under different client ID at quarter end. Moisture Games shaved declared grade just under thresholds that trigger human review. A 0.9% variance lives on an accounting line. 1.1% summons a clipboard. Curves stayed under the tripwire. The ledger smiled. A lab tech, careful, noticed the spectrometer's reference standard read soft. Calibration overdue. Low reads hid higher gold content. He filed a ticket. A manager closed it. Recalibrated operator variance. He stayed late, ran a second pass on a friend's login, printed the higher result, and slid it into a folder he kept off-site. He stopped talking. Maritime choreography adapted. Barges that once carried or joined convoys of legitimate aggregate carriers. Captains learned new lines, roadbeds, airport expansion, flood control. Custom screens saw crushed rock from a producer with a record of shipping crushed rock. A crane swung bulk sacks with no serials. Relief washed across decks used to sweating audits. The money moved first again. SBFS adjacent messages dropped the refinery language and referenced aggregate contracts. Pledges shifted vocabulary from grams to equivalent value at assay. Credits hit integrator shells before furnaces ever got warm. Reconciliation happened later at the toll refiner. Velocity returned to the place that needed it. Monday intake. Impact showed up in the build rooms. Integrator hubs that had spaced shifts called crews back. Motors under HS 8413, pumps flowed after a 2-week lull. Survey kit optics resumed. Firmware signing windows felt normal again. First Monday of the quarter, cert chain rolling green. Strike tempo crept upward. Not the old peak, but enough to turn a quiet week restless. Investigators pivoted. They stopped chasing stamps and started chasing dirt. Conveyor belts leave signatures, throughput spikes that sync with pledge credits. Moisture Games leave patterns, shipments that arrive heavy and leave light after storage loss. Insurance claims for water damage crept up on aggregate cargoes from specific yards. The same MAC address batches reappeared in downed drones within days of aggregate consignments clearing toll, refiners 1,000 miles from the pit. The ore changed outfit. The metadata didn't. Ports learned to weigh skepticism. Random course sampling punched into bulk sacks nobody used to touch. Portable XRF guns hummed next to stone. When a spike lit a screen, an inspector called a supervisor. The supervisor read the memo on collateral damage and waved to a side bay instead of out the gate. Hold, test, tag tighter, release. Not justice. Triage. Communities felt the switch like a weather change. Shadow buyers paid less per sack because lab results read low. Miners couldn't argue with a clipboard. Liquidity still reached markets thinner. Diesel rose by dusk. The clinic's generator coughed at midnight. The chief promised another negotiation, then took a call he couldn't take in public. Micro stories carried the cost. A geologist told to massage assays, aim low, avoid declarations, refused. The next morning his badge opened a room labeled Training and Outreach. No samples, just laminated posters and a wobbling stool. He lasted a week, then visited family. His sister said he stopped answering at the border. Meanwhile, desks missed their metronome. The Friday Mirror cache mattered less. Aggregate didn't wear that ghostly ISO line. Arbitrage traps bit weaker when pledges said equivalent value and assays chased ships. The counter moved downstream. If you can't catch the money at the mint, catch the build. Firmware signers with no lab, integrator-specific parts that only fit one family of weather platforms. HS 8413, cousins that show up 2 days after clean gold trucks scan post 2. port inspector learned to watch that slipstream. If a clean corridor truck pinged noon Tuesday, expect pumps by Thursday. He asked for overtime and a drill bit made for foam. A bonded warehouse called him on a hunch. False bottoms gave way to brushless motors. The hub missed a window. A substation everyone had circled stayed lit. The pipeline had traded bars for rocks and won a few weeks, but rhythms leave trails, moisture curves, storage loss, weekend pledges, Monday builds. The disguise bought time. Metadata took it back, one side bay drill and one missed signing window at a time. Procurement shadows, motors, optics and firmware. If you can't see the money, watch what the money buys. Capability has a shape, and it walks through ports with a smile. Motors move as pumps, optics as survey kits, airframes as polymer shells, and the brain that ties it all together hides in firmware signed by a vendor that doesn't have a lab you can visit. Stakes live in torque, sight, and trust. A brushless motor that clears as a pump turns a $200 toy into a $2,000 weapon. A thermal core slipped into a research kit lets a swarm hunt past midnight. A signed update tells countermeasures to aim a fraction late. One procurement cycle missed buys a city one quiet night. One cycle made on time steals it back. Action passes through third countries that drink good coffee and file clean forms. A packing floor slides out runners into impeller housings, pads the cartons with gaskets and PVC elbows, and stamps HS8413 on the label. The supplier code matches a factory that actually makes irrigation gear, so the first sniff passes. The consignee wears a university's name. The dock clerk sees a grant number and waves a forklift over. Optics hide better. The invoice lists tripods, calibration charts, and orange vests arranged like a catalog photo. The cores, microbolometers wrapped in antistatic, sit in the center tray. The route splits assembly and export. Components in country A, QA in country B, shipment from country C with a customs portal famous for speed. Cameras, the courier says, and he's not wrong, just not honest. Airframes barely need a mask. Educational weather platforms and polymer housings fit clean lanes with sleepy risk engines. The trick isn't any single crate, it's cadence. Sets of 3 shells, pumps, optics arrive to the same PO box across 2 weeks, spread across different carriers so no manifest looks complete. Asynchronous assembly is the hub's favorite language. Detail hides where few look. The device identities baked into parts. Down drones spill MAC address batches. The OUIs that tell you who made the network card. Those OUIs cluster in lots that reappear across fronts within days of 8413, spikes through 2 bonded warehouses. Investigators overlay container numbers scraped from free zone, CCTV with carrier scans, and firmware signing keys recovered from crash storage. The map tightens to windows. Tuesday gate beeps, Friday night swarms, the same OUI ranges whispering from wreckage. Firmware is the lever most ignored. Updates arrive signed by a shell vendor with a clean certificate chain and no physical footprint. Its website chirps about environmental monitoring. The cert renews like a clock. First Monday of the quarter, whether it's New Year's or a national holiday. Integrator techs plug a jig into a laptop, pick a profile, and watch a progress bar crawl while a fan nudges dust across the bench. The same signing key keeps showing up in captured devices. Headers carrying byte patterns you could recognize at a glance if you've stared at enough dumps. A human moment lands in a back office with low light. Oksana, a technician with neat logs and a stubborn streak, opens a ticket. Intermittent stalls under load after firmware 317. She records 3 failures on test stands, all tied to motors from a pump consignment that cleared after a Sunday reconciliation. Her lead marks it operator variance and closes the case. Quarter end again. She reopens with curves and current spikes and a note. The new PID table looks tuned for a heavier prop. Vendor liaison gets the ticket, which means no one until next month. She pockets the logs anyway. Meanwhile, the shell vendor that signs the code invoices a municipal tender for environmental software maintenance. The tender office keeps green folders in a drawer with signatures staffers will later swear aren't theirs. The folders authorize spare pump assemblies, routed to a warehouse we've already watched change names on Wednesdays. The Mac and firmware breadcrumbs stack until you can predict the intake. A certain carrier code scans a bonded gate on Tuesday, a lab cert rolls green on Monday, and a signing window opens Wednesday afternoon when the security camera always blinks. The hub hums like a metronome. Crews press bearings, seat esks, and click labels that turn kits into platforms. Vans roll with Weather Lab stenciled clean. Impact shows up where it always does. Accuracy inches upward, hit windows shift earlier into twilight, and repair crews start to find fresh scorch marks where a swarm clipped transformer tops on the first pass. Countermeasures lag because the brain keeps changing. Jitter added here, timing offset there, watchdog tweaks that turn yesterday's signature into today's shrug. The fix doesn't shout, it whispers in rules. Forwarders that book 8413 in weeks when suspect certs renew face side bay drills and short settlement. Carriers that route shells, pumps, and survey kits to the same PO box inside 7 days hit a human review that asks for purchase orders and lab addresses that exist on a map. Tech liability insurers quietly require firmware signers to show a lab, staff, and inventory before they'll bind cover. No lab, no policy. No policy, no freight. The shell's clean chain starts to look lonely on a screen. Micro stories tell you the edges move. A free zone clerk learns to weigh pumps and flags a crate 10% heavy. Foam gives way to outrunners. An integrator HR manager posts temporary furloughs because the signing window opened with fewer kits than orders. Oksana's ticket gets a reply. Hold 317 on blue tape bills. She tilts her head, prints the note, and tapes it above the jig. Procurement shadows won't vanish. They'll slide to HS cousins, borrow new universities, and rename the shell that signs code on Mondays. That's fine. The cadence itself is a tell. If you make that rhythm expensive, more drills, shorter credit, real labs, you don't stop the machine. You make it miss, and every miss is a night someone gets back. The integrator hub, a warehouse with too many names. From the ring road it looked forgettable, sun-bleached siding, a roll-up door that screamed, a guard in a faded cap scrolling a cracked phone. On Monday the sign read Edu Tech Components. By Wednesday it was Meteo Labs Storage. The lease listed a third name nobody ever painted. Same forklifts, same vans. Only the paperwork wore new clothes. This was the crucible. Parts arrived as educational kits, pumps, and research optics, then left as aerial weather platforms that never met a cloud. Shut this room down, and the swarms pause long enough for defenses to breathe. Miss, and the rhythm flexes while jigs keep clamping parts at dusk. Inside, the choreography ran on color and habit. Intake scanned barcodes with a handheld pulling data from a compliance portal cloned off the mirror registry. Green checks, no questions. Crews stacked cartons by tape, red for shells, blue for motors, yellow for cores. Benches lined the back wall, jigs numbered in grease pencil. A laptop on a scarred desk ran a utility that called itself weather software. Plug a fixture in, select a profile, and watch a firmware signing chirp green. The same cert we kept finding in wreckage flashed on screen like a quiet confession. Cadence ruled everything. Mondays brought boxes whose tracking matched late Sunday SPFS reconciliations. Tuesdays, a van from a university lab dropped calibration fixtures no university buys twice. Every Wednesday, the CCTV went dark for exactly 60 minutes. That's when torque met plastic, bearings pressed, esks married wiring looms, thermal cores seated into gimbals once destined to survey soil. The mask rotated as needed. One day the hub shipped under charity exemption for educational equipment, the next under municipal permit for infrastructure spares. The permit number stayed constant while the applicant name changed. A freight forwarder handled the sleight of hand, switching consignee fields mid-route when a registry tightened. Bills of lading could morph from Meteo Labs to Edu Tech with a keystroke. The crate did care which alias cleared the bay. Small details tied this dock to debris pulled from fields a continent away. Foam inserts sized for pump impellers fit brushless outrunners down to the millimeter. Resin flecks on jigs matched shards in crash bags. Label rolls on a rack-red spare pump assembly, bound for a municipal tender warehouse that received dozens and installed none. A whiteboard listed routes in dry erase, two faint lines barely there, an inland hop through 3 agrarian border posts, and a coastal feeder that went technical, just shy of AIS violation thresholds. A driver's hesitation said the quiet part. He'd hauled honest irrigation parts for years and knew what a pump weighed. He nudged a weather platform's pallet with his boot and felt mass where there shouldn't be any. He thought about calling the supervisor, remembered what happened to the last guy who asked questions, and strapped the load. Across the street, a woman poured tea and kept a notebook. She wrote down van plates when sugar ran low and men grew talkative. A surveillance team learned her rhythm. Quiet on Mondays, busy on Wednesdays, a flurry 10 minutes after the camera blinked back to life. They counted cigarette breaks by the guard booth. They mapped the minutes between the Wednesday blackout and the first outbound van. When the cadence lined up, Friday mirror validations, Sunday credits, Monday intake spike, Wednesday blackout, the door rolled up to more than forklifts. Boots scuffed concrete. The jig's fan spun down mid-chirp. Crews froze, shells in hand. The intake laptop stared with the signing utility open, cert chain glowing green. Racks held foam cutouts, some empty, some cradling motors with leads crimped for esques nowhere on the manifest. A stack of survey kits hid cores under false bottoms. They photographed everything. Fixtures, shims, bolts, bolt patterns that matched a family of frames we traced by MAC OUI batches. The label printer's queue still listed consignments to the tender warehouse with the habit of accepting spares and installing nothing. Along the back wall, a shelf of green folders carried municipal stamps that looked real enough until you called the staffers whose names signed them. They swore they'd never seen those forms. Then the twist on the wall map. 2 faint routes drawn so light they could be wiped without a smudge. Inland through farm gates nobody thinks to inspect for electronics, and coastal, hopping feeders whose AIS flickers never hit enforcement thresholds. Neither lane appeared in any public compliance playbook. Both fit too cleanly with captures we'd logged by accident. A van's reflection in a shop window here, a bonded gate beep there. Impact rippled the way rhythms do when someone knocks the metronome off the table. For 3 weeks, intake stuttered. A night shift got cancelled without warning. A signing window opened to a room with fewer kits than orders. A sister warehouse 40 minutes away flickered to life. Stencils ready, nameplates swapped. The guards cap a shade cleaner. Phones in the first hub wiped themselves to static in the time it took to find charges. Leases dissolved into PDFs signed by men who didn't live at the listed addresses. Fallout hit mismatched. A temp worker who fed his mother's medicine budget in cash found himself outside a gate that wouldn't open. An assembler got a text with a new address, same hours. Bring your gloves. The tea seller underlined a fresh set of plates and circled a new Wednesday hour. The guard shrugged when asked about the blackout. Maintenance. And the artery we needed to cut still pulsed in code. The shell vendor's cert renewed on the first Monday of the quarter. Holidays be damned. The utility on the intake desk would sing green anywhere a jig could plug in. You can wrench a hub and buy nights. To unspool a season, you need to pull the thread that tells every warehouse with too many names when to breathe. Command and custody, the broker above the brokers. Close a hub and the cadence stumbles, but orders still arrive. Someone, or something, keeps time when names on the door change and managers go dark. Not a single loud broker. A conductor you can't subpoena because it's more protocol than person. The trail surfaced when nobody expected. Weekend gaming servers. Encrypted channels bloomed when player traffic peaked, Friday nights and Sunday afternoons, exactly when the mirror validated, refining solutions east, and SBFS adjacent reconciliations ran. The chat read like hobby talk until you saw the numbers. Drop 12.5 at RSC, 99.95 finest. That isn't a quest. That's a refinery-grade weight and purity. RSC matched the ghost's initials. Coordinates came as 3 words: river, magnet, amber, expiring QR snippets, and hashes that aligned with pledge references buried in payment notes. No voices to tap, just cues. Custody lived in places nobody searched. Recovery phrases etched along the hollow shafts of drill bits in a maintenance bin. Mnemonic shards hidden under epoxy inside a forklift's control panel. Hash fragments printed on the backs of laminated safety checklists in a locker labeled Spill Kit. If a courier lost a phone, an operator could reconstruct access by visiting 3 rooms and peeling 2 stickers. Not crypto headlines. Quiet, physical key splitting that didn't need the internet. The broker issued windows, not orders. A pledge token only unlocked when 3 external events aligned. Mirror validation in the Friday 2355 band. An SBFS field carrying equivalent value at a say, tied to a beneficiary on a short whitelist. And a carrier scan that matched an HS8413 batch through one of 2 bonded warehouses. When the trifecta hit, a one-time signing permission spun up on an air-gapped laptop inside the hub. Plug in a jig, select a profile, and the firmware utility chirped green. Miss a window and the token died, a right storm scrubbing the drive into static. Permissions moved by hand because hands leave fewer logs. USBs arrived in training kits with branded pens and glossy pamphlets about environmental monitoring. The tiny client on the air-gapped box didn't move money. It derived ephemeral authorizations bound to pledge weight and shipment milestones. The ledger module, a private cousin to the mirror's exception list, matched those authorizations to refinery booking IDs cloned from the cache and to assay entries that borrowed legitimacy from a dead man's checksum. When a bar was fiction, but the timing was real, the door still swung. Paperwork sang backup vocals. A municipal tender drawer held green folders authorizing spare pump assemblies routed to the very warehouse whose jigs we'd catalogued. The language matched a public template. The signatures matched staffers who swore they'd never signed. You don't bribe every clerk. You borrow a notary stamp once and make copies by warm light. When a mid-tier coordinator finally got grabbed, 3 phones, 7 mailboxes, neat shoes, his desk didn't have a Rolodex. It held 2 air-gapped laptops, a tin of desiccant pouches with stickers that flaked to reveal 6-letter codes, and a drill index with faint scratches along 3 shafts. He could describe the rhythm, Friday, Sunday, Monday, the weights and thresholds. He couldn't name a boss. Replaceable by design. The machine reacted like software. His channel flickered, then flooded with decoys, pledge weights that failed a check digit, QR codes that expired into noise. 48 hours later, cues returned from a new room, same structure, hashes salted anew, route hints nudging the inland line we'd seen faint on the hub's wall map. Continuity lived in state, not in a person. Investigators stopped looking for a head and mapped gates instead. Gate 1. Validation at any registry mirror that still tolerated near-match checksums. Gate 2. Pledge translation, SBFS fields carrying equivalent value at a say through a partner API. Gate 3. HS8413 cluster confirmation, pumps or their cousins clearing specific free zones. Gate 4. The signing window, cert chain renewals that arrived first Monday of the quarter, jig authorization chirps that always matched a known hour. Then they jammed gates, not faces. Auditors narrowed checksum tolerance on industry mirrors and demanded published exception lists under independent review. Banks added human eyes to pledge messages that used equivalent value at a say, especially when consignees also received 8413 heavy cargo. Customs seeded a quiet rule. Any warehouse shipping above a monthly threshold of educational kits, aerial platforms, or environmental sensors had to declare a persistent building ID. Nameplates could rotate. The UUID couldn't. If strikes kept mapping to that UUID's outflows, export windows narrowed, and maintenance Wednesdays required live camera uptime with sealed logs. Insurers wrote policies that woke and slept by code. Tech liability cover for firmware signers now hinged on a public register. Verifiable lab, staff with real resumes, inventory you could photograph. No lab, no cover. No cover, no freight. A signer that once renewed certs from a time zone that didn't match its office found forwarders less friendly on Mondays. Micro-stories marked progress. A mid-level regulator signed a dull memo harmonizing HS8413 anomaly flags across 3 ports and tied them to mirror audit scores and a short list of suspect signers. No press. The next Monday, 4 pump pallets idled in secondary bays in 3 countries. The hub's jig chirped to fewer kits than orders. 3 consecutive nights passed without a swarm. The broker above the brokers kept breathing because it was never lungs. It was choreography cached in mirrors, etched in tool steel, ferried by checklists and timed to weekends. You don't arrest a protocol, you raise its cost. Every checksum tightened, every pledge slowed for proof, every UUID that outlived a nameplate. Each bent the playbook until running it meant missing beats. And in this war, missed beats turn into lights that stay on. Collateral damage, sanctions, shortages, and street markets. You don't feel a guidance memo, you feel a price jump at the stall. The weak insurers paused key corridors and audits tightened on mirror-linked flows. Onions doubled by Tuesday. Diesel got sold by the mug. Buyers at the mine shaved grams to cover volatility and closed early with a shrug. The arithmetic landed in kitchens, not boardrooms. Stakes cut straight through families. Sanctions targeted corridors and codes. Life runs on credit and fuel. A mother who used to buy antibiotics on Thursdays now faced a cash demand she couldn't meet. She pawned a radio. The clinic's generator sputtered after dusk. A pastor turned his hall into a fuel bank, rationed by ticket and short sermon, then watched the drum run dry 2 days sooner than last month. Street markets adapted with brutal logic. Gold for goods loops came back in miniature. A ring for rice, a chain for a jerrycan, a nugget for a week of diesel. Traders weighed jewelry on pocket scales and argued over carrots under bear bulbs. A boy learned a loop before a book. By sundown, fights broke out over weights and promises. The chief walked the aisle with an envelope and a nod toward the mine road, buying calm for a day. Shadow lenders stepped in wearing pressed shirts. Cash today against sacks tomorrow, interest that swallowed 2 days if you missed one. Men with rifles collected road maintenance at the turnoff where the track narrows, double if you carried diesel, triple if you carried grain. Every checkpoint taught the same lesson. Liquidity is power, and someone always taxes power. Migration ticked up. Young men peeled off toward border towns where aggregate processing posted cash jobs. Some raked real gravel. Others moved sacks that weren't stone. A bus station filled with plastic bags tied in tight knots and faces from farther upriver. A grandmother cried because her granddaughter, the one who'd finally caught up in school, stopped going. Her mother needed another pair of hands in the river. Books became pans again. Governors felt the heat on roundabouts. Tires, drums, no slogans, just demands. Pay old prices, cut lender rates. A provincial minister promised to stabilize markets and posed at a gate with a hard hat. Stabilize meant a loan program funneled through cousins and a press note about strategic partnerships. The road reopened for a day. The loan office ran out of paper by noon. Micro stories stacked. A port clerk who took a buyout under audit rules reappeared stamping training certificates in a windowless room. A whistleblower's family moved at midnight. A neighbor fed their dog for a week. A geologist demoted to outreach drew moisture games on a chalkboard, how crushed stone gets heavier wet, how assay slips drift low. He told miners to demand second samples. Some nodded. Most stared at boots and counted debt. Meanwhile, clean corridor tents tried to outrun the pain. Prepay at fair prices in local currency cut the shadow buyer's skim, but militants taxed the queue. The ledger beeped. The roadblock ate receipts. Still, panners started pointing at barcodes on phones and saying, "Pay me that." And a savings circle bought a spare generator for the clinic, posting the receipt to the public ledger like a small victory. Across the wire, capitals issued fresh advisories. Treat SBFS pledge language with human eyes, align HS8413 anomaly flags, audit mirrors that tolerate near matches. Banks tightened in some places, shuffled risk in others. The flow flexed. The price stayed mean. Women formed rotating credit clubs to buffer spikes. A teacher started night classes under a stolen solar panel, teaching math with weights and rates because that's what hurt. Here's the quiet cruelty inside the fix. The same edits that slow swarms make dinner thinner first. The pipeline learns to price pain. The counter has to learn to shield it, one fair barcode at a time. The counter engine, clean gold corridors and radical transparency. If the pipeline fed on ambiguity, the counter had to make daylight a habit, not speeches, systems. Tents at mine gates with bright lights, scales that did break at night, and a promise that sounded simple and landed like a new rule. Fair price, same day in local currency, stamped to a ledger nobody could edit in a back office. It started with a truck pulling up to canvas and light. A miner handed over doré. A tech in a faded vest cleaned a corner, ran an assay on a calibrated spectrometer, and called the numbers out loud. Weight to the gram, fineness to 3 decimals. A second tech scanned the device's calibration check from that morning, pass or fail, because the reading meant nothing if the machine drifted. Then came the code, a barcode printed on a tough label and tied, right there, to time, GPS, mine ID, and the tech's name, all pushed to an open ledger the miner could pull up on a phone. No mirrors, no caches, no performance layers that forgave typos. One source of truth. Payment wasn't a handshake in dust. It was a transfer from a float funded to stay inside the community, cash in local currency, counted into a hand while the label still warmed. The float replenished later when vetted refiners, real doors, audited labs, settled the buy. The rule everyone learned fast. If a refiner wouldn't work on open data, the lane didn't carry their metal. The game was trust us. It was check it. The tag on the bag mattered. Each one carried a tamper-evident seal with an NFC chip so cheaper market phone could read it. Tap, and you saw what the screen showed at the tent. Mine ID, weight, fineness, route plan, insured or not. If a truck drifted or a seal pinged from a free zone famous for packaging optimization, the policy put itself to sleep, and 3 phones buzzed. Driver, dispatcher, and the local oversight committee the community elected under a mango tree. No agency had to kick a door. The code said this shipment stopped trusting you 5 minutes ago. Route built guardrails with people instead of rifles. 3 checkpoints staffed by community reps, mothers who knew who owes who, elders who remember who borrowed what, scanned the tags, logged time and position, and got a small stipend for doing it on time. The stipend posted to the same ledger with their names spelled right. If a militia muscled in and called it a tax, the delay stamped itself in public, and the float to that route paused until the rate came back to what was agreed. Not perfect. But it turned shakedowns into receipts somebody had to own. Customs got a version that worked for them. Clean corridor shipments pre-declared honest HS codes that matched what was on the truck, and a small thing with big teeth, an auto-flag rule in port risk engines that watch for pairings. If a clean gold truck's plate pinged a gate at noon Tuesday, the system nudged any pump consignment by the same forwarder inside 48 hours to secondary. It wasn't an accusation. It was connective tissue. The old trick, hide a motor under a conva that screens as virtuous, started to miss steps. Insurers leaned in because the loss math turned friendly. They priced down cover when tags hit scan quotas, calibration checks posted on time, routes matched plans, and consignee labs showed up on a public register. They priced up when claims came from mirrors and caches with flexible checksums. One underwriter, who used to wave farm equipment through, began writing cover notes that read like a promise you could audit. Origin, mine 42. Seal 18, 37, GPS logged, calibration check passed. Destination, Refiner Z, ISA, verified on official registry yesterday. Deviation pauses cover automatically. That sentence killed 3 grey paper hustles before lunch. Banks learned new reflexes. SBFS adjacent pledges using equivalent value at assay didn't die. They got asked to show their homework. A human had to see an on-ledger assay entry if a payment memo leaned on grams to unlock a credit. Honest clients cleared fast because they had the QR in their pocket. Shells with agri-coupe, letterhead, and no dirt under their nails found the door slow. Speed stopped being a gift for whoever spoke in euphemisms. Meanwhile, the brokers wearing universities and calibration gear tried to board the lane. The ledger didn't care about stationery, it cared about behavior. It cross-checked declared co-ops with geological surveys and past output. A new group claiming tonnage a river couldn't give got throttled. It scored forwarders on pairs that kept showing up dirty. Shells 1 week, humps 2 weeks later, survey kits right behind. If a pattern matched the old swarm cadence, the lane pushed those crates to a side bay with a drill bit and a patient inspector. The counter-engine rippled downstream to the parts no one wanted to name. Firmware signing services, the neat little websites with pristine cert chains and no lab doors, got a new condition from tech liability insurers. Show a lab, show staff, show inventory. Post your facility to public register with a lat long and a phone that rings, or the policy won't bind. No policy meant forwarders became allergic. Hubs noticed when the cert that used to renew on the first Monday of the quarter started drawing questions at the dock. The integrator hubs lost a favorite trick. Customs began requiring any warehouse shipping above a threshold of educational kits, aerial weather platforms, or environmental sensors to declare a persistent building ID, something a nameplate swap couldn't wash away. That UUID stuck to bills of lading and insurance certificates. If strikes kept mapping to that ID's outflows, camera uptime became mandatory during declared packing hours. Maintenance Wednesdays got crowded with eyes. The human proof lived in small turns. A miner's daughter, back in school after a year on the river, tapped a bag seal with her mother watching and read the numbers out loud. When a buyer in town tried to shave the price for volatility, her mother held up the phone. "Pay me that." He paid. A savings circle posted a ledger screenshot next to a new clinic generator and laughed about how quiet it was to sleep without diesel hammering all night. A customs inspector who'd learned to watch the slipstream called in a Sunday shift when a clean truck pinged a gate at noon. 40 hours later, pumps slid into a side bay. Foam gave way to outrunners. The hub missed a window. The jig's green chirp came to an empty bench. No press release. Just a night the linemen had circled in red that stayed ordinary. The militias adapted, as they always do. They set up community tolls and tried to brand them as order. The receipt number showed up on the ledger. Rates that spiked paused floats. Calls got made. Governors who liked ribbon cuttings at clean tents didn't like being tagged next to predatory tolls. Some roadblocks softened. Others moved down the track and learned to negotiate at noon instead of midnight. Nothing about this ran on magic. It ran on boring, repeatable checks. Calibration logs that posted before coffee, seals that tattled when cut, routes that matched maps, names spelled right, UUIDs that outlived logos, and policies that woke up and slept by code. It cost money, and it demanded patience in places sick of waiting. But every clean gram that reached a refiner, trusted by screens and humans, shrank the shadow spread that paid for pumps, that weren't pumps, and survey kits, that watched more than fields. And the map began to talk to itself. The clean ledger pushed timing to port risk engines. Insurers fed anomaly scores back to tenths. Banks used on-ledger assays to speed honest credits and slow SBFS pledges that hid behind equivalent value. The old choreography, Friday mirror tick, Sunday pledge, Monday intake, kept trying to dance. The floor under it got stickier every week. Here, where the math met the lights. A miner's bag scanned true at noon. A port flagged a slipstream pump 2 days later. A hub's Wednesday blackout met a locked door, and a city that should have lost a substation at midnight didn't. No victory banner, just a ledger entry, a side bay drill, a policy that slept when it smelled a lie, and a night that felt like a normal night. The pressure points. What moves the needle now? We're past raids and headline sanctions. What matters now are levers that bend the pipeline's joints without snapping the bones of the places it runs through. The question sounds simple and lands like a dare. What moves the needle with the least collateral and fast enough to steal nights? Start where plastic turns lethal. Firmware. The signer that kept showing up in wreckage isn't a mystery. It's a tidy vendor with a clean certificate chain, no visible lab, and a website about environmental monitoring. Cut the breath without a courtroom. Tech liability insurers can require signers to list verifiable facilities, staff, and inventory on a public register. No lab, no cover. Without cover, forwarders won't touch those crates, banks won't float working capital, and customs has a reason to hold pallets when documents say software update, but the signer lives in a PO box. You don't ban a key, you starve the trust around it. Next, squeeze the parts that don't have true substitutes. Motors will keep slipping under HS8413 unless ports can quietly tag the bits that only fit certain frames. Build a short, boring list. Stator sizes, ESC models with telltale firmware headers, gimbal bolt patterns you only see in one weather platform family. Share it across a handful of ports that already scan well. Pilot an auto flag. If a pump consignment carries those SKUs or their close cousins, it meets a drill, not a stamp, especially when it lands inside 48 hours of SPFS adjacent credits. Pair that with small grants for Sunday overtime and better imaging. Not a wall, a doorstop at the right moments. Then fix the mirrors. The barcode taught us what a lazy checksum can do. Any industry-facing registry mirror, ISO stamps, refinery lists, cert lookups, should publish checksum rules and exception lists under independent quarterly audit. Tie insurance discounts and trade finance rates to those audits. If a mirror tolerates near matches that let clones live, users pay more. Brokers will call it friction. Good. Friction is what turned a Friday night metronome into a missed window. HS code harmonization doesn't need fire. It needs pattern memory. Keep irrigation parts moving. Aim at behavior. Set anomaly flags, not bans. If HS8413 shipments drift 10% over spec and travel in the same week as polymer shells and survey kits to the same forwarder, they go to secondary. No drama, just a drill. Publish the pattern so honest traders can plan. Back it with a micro fund that compensates real farmers when clean cargo gets delayed. Fairness keeps the public on side and steals excuses from fixers. Payments are slippery, but fields have edges. You won't switch off SPFS. You can narrow, euphemism. Ask a few partner banks with reach to add human review to equivalent value at a say, pledge messages, especially when beneficiaries also receive 8,413 heavy cargo. Don't freeze. Slow with questions. Show the assay, the mine ID, or a clean ledger link. Tie it to service level agreements so honest clients don't drown in paperwork. Shells that fear daylight will root around you. That's the tell. Integrator hubs love rotating names. Pin them to the ground. Customs can require any warehouse shipping above a threshold of educational kits, aerial platforms, or environmental sensors to declare a persistent building ID, one UUID that sticks to bills of lading, tenders, and insurance. When the sign flips, the ID doesn't. If strike patterns keep mapping to that ID's outflows, narrow its permissions. Shorter export windows, mandatory live camera uptime during packing hours, pre-approval for 8413 cousins. Maintenance Wednesdays, stop being black holes. Now weaponize boring software. Build a shared module, open, dull, reliable, that checks barcodes against official registries, flags mirror lookups without audit trails, pings the clean gold ledger for root coincidences, and scores HS8413 clusters that ride with polymer shells and survey kits. Give it away to customs, insurers, and forwarders. If it becomes the default, the pipeline loses the home field advantage of bad defaults. Use the clean corridor as radar, not just a conscience. When a vetted Doré truck scans post 2 at noon, port risk engines can auto-nudge any pump consignment from the same forwarder inside 2 days to secondary. That slipstream pairing has been the mask for years. Connect the dots quietly, and you flip cover from protection to pressure. Don't ignore the mid-level memo. A regulator who signs dull papers can stall a season if those papers harmonize 3 things: HS8413 anomaly flags, mirror registry audit scores, and a short list of suspect firmware signers. No press conference, just a date on a calendar when, across 3 ports, 4 pump pallets wait in secondary, while a Wednesday jig chirps to an empty bench. Nights come back in clusters when the right people get the same nudge at the same time. On pricing, keep the knife sharp and pointed away from kitchens. Continue timing modest stabilization auctions to the Windows shadow books lean on, but pair them with MineGate prepay programs that post fair prices on a public ledger. Every clean gram that reaches a refiner cuts the spread that pays for parts, and gives miners a reference price they can point to when a buyer tries to shade for volatility. And keep pressing the affidavits of trust. Insurers can write policies that wake and sleep by code. Camera uptime logs attached to warehouse UUIDs. Calibration checks posted before dawn at assay tents. SBFS pledges that clear only when a QR proves the grams exist in the open ledger. The more services that learn to trust public traces over private shortcuts, the fewer rooms the pipeline can hide in. The human angle is the check on all of this. Every pressure point needs a relief valve. Micro funds for honest agribusiness caught in secondary. Fast lanes for real pumps with purchase orders you can call. Translation help for co-ops that want to register on the clean ledger but don't have the words for it. If daylight costs less than shadow, people choose it. You won't end the machine. You'll make it late, lighter, and more expensive to run. Cut breath from signers with no labs. Drill the pumps carrying torque. Audit the mirrors that forgave typos. Slow euphemism in SBFS fields without strangling peril. Pin warehouses to UUIDs that outlive logos. Share boring tools until they're everywhere. Fund clean grams so spreads starve. One mid-level memo and a side bay drill at the right hour can buy a city a week of ordinary nights. In this war, ordinary is the win. The barcode's secret, metadata as a weapon. It began as noise, an off-by-one checksum on a bar that shouldn't have existed, and turned into a clock you could set your week by. The barcode was never the prize. The cadence was. Once Refining Solutions East lit green in that mirror 5 minutes before Friday rollover, the team stopped chasing cargo and started listening for ticks, validations, pledge notes, HS clusters, cert renewals, Mac OUIs, firmware signatures. Code doesn't get tired. It repeats. Stakes were blunt. If metadata could predict the hidden engine, you could move before a drone left a bench. Miss the rhythm, and you keep catching boxes while the sky kept learning new paths. Nobody needed courtroom proof. They needed hours, stolen from a choreography that depended on routine. Action began with a calendar that refused to lie. The mirrors, east, validations hit at 23:55 Fridays. 41 hours later, SBFS adjacent credits with equivalent value at assay pinged beneficiaries labeled as agri-coops, labs, or weather platforms. 12 hours after that, HS 8413 consignments, pumps, scanned into bonded warehouses with gross weights that didn't fit honest specs. Overlay that with firmware cert renewals, the same shell signer rolling on the first Monday of each quarter, and a window opened that you could drive a van through. Investigators set quiet tripwires under the moments when code had to talk. A mirror query, a pledge note, a bonded gate beep, a jig's authorization chirp. The joins were boring by design. Free zone gate scans with timestamps, registry lookup logs, port X-ray queues, a clean gold corridor ledger that miners now use to argue for fair pay. Add modest compute and a short list of questions. Did these three things happen in this order inside this window? And you had a radar. Patterns stopped behaving like coincidence and started behaving like instructions. Weekends in one port predicted Monday raids 3 borders away. A Wednesday camera, Blackout at a hub that loved new nameplates mapped to a firmware chirp that same afternoon. A batch of Mac OUIs found in downed drones traced back to a Tuesday carrier scan at a free zone whose coffee vendor kept a tab book that doubled as a log. None of it sang solo. Together, it harmonized. They built a rule set that never named a flag and didn't need to. If the mirror validated east inside the Friday band, insureds nudged any HS 8413 cargo booked by last quarter's forwarders to secondary. If SBFS fields leaned on equivalent value at assay, a human had to see an assay or a clean ledger link before credits cleared. If a firmware signer with no physical lab pushed an update in a week when bonded warehouses logged educational kits, outbound pallets met a drill, not a stamp. Screens didn't say geopolitics, they asked for receipts. Micro stories marked when the abstract turned real. A junior analyst noticed clean, aggregate shipments from a yard that always declared moisture loss after 3 coastal days, followed by pledge notes carefully dodging the new review clause. She flagged a port at midnight. By dawn, a side bay drill found outrunners under survey kits. That night, the substation everyone circled stayed lit. Metadata started telling on the ghosts. The mirror's validation script never shifted for daylight savings. Servers don't care about summer. The SBFS partners weekend batch left tiny signature differences in optional fields when the human on-call changed. HS8413 clusters bunched at quarter-ins when managers buried anomalies under close process. The shell signer's cert chain renewed from a time zone that didn't match its office address. Postcards from places the vendor swore it didn't know. Ports learned to work Sundays like Mondays. Insurers priced down daylight and priced up mirrors with sloppy checksums. Customs stopped treating pumps, polymer shells, and survey kits as 3 lanes and scored them as a single behavior when they traveled together. The broker above the brokers kept breathing, but its lungs wheezed when the windows it counted on, Friday, Sunday, Monday, shrunk to gaps you could jam with coffee and overtime. Meanwhile, the clean corridor ledger turned from conscience to sensor. A miner's barcode, time, GPS, assay, names started outranking mirror caches in port risk engines. When a forwarder tried the old slipstream trick, hiding pumps 2 days behind a clean truck, the risk engine blinked and waved the pumps to a side bay. No drama, a scan and a drill. The machine adapted because it's built to. The mirror slid servers and swapped suffixes. The signer rolled keys. The hub shifted its blackout to Thursday, but habits reassert. The lazy patch still drifted the checksum. The cert renewal still hit quarter open, holidays be damned. The hub still liked the hour when the boss stepped out. You don't catch them forever. You catch them often enough that a season loses its shape. Here, where it tightened to a single sentence on a sticky note. The analyst who refused to let an off-by-one slide taped the barcode drift above her monitor and wrote, "Don't chase boxes, chase behavior." 2 weeks later, 3 pump pallets idled in secondary while a jig chirped to an empty bench. The lights everyone had penciled in red stayed on. The revelation was never the bar. It was the barcode as a metaphor stamped across everything. A bill of lading, a tender receipt, an assay log, a firmware cert, a dock camera's uptime. Metadata turned out to be a weapon, the kind that steals nights back without shouting. The choreography that fed on loopholes kept trying to dance. The beat kept slipping. And when a pattern slips, you can dull it. You don't need headlines. You need a calendar, a coffee thermos, a drill bit for foam, and a rule that says every mirror must prove it's a mirror, not a mask. The engine runs on loopholes and rhythm, cut the cadence and the drones starve by degrees. If you want the follow-through, how firmware signers lose their breath, why UUIDs pin warehouses to the floor, and which mid-level memos stall 1,000 sorties, watch the next film and subscribe. Share this with the person who thinks sanctions is a spell. Then ask them which barcode they're checking and which mirror they're trusting.